A lot of emissions are from waste. We're a very wasteful society. So how can we reduce this in future, the emissions from waste?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of good news and there's a lot of bad news. The bad news is today waste is pumping out into the atmosphere about 1 billion tons of CO2 equivalents, and that's mainly methane from landfills that are not capturing the gas in the landfills. But the really bad news is that over the next 10, 15 years, that's going to treble, because all the consumption coming from developing countries, urbanization, developing countries, the more waste that developing countries throw away is going to contribute to a huge increase in CO2 emissions from waste. So there's not just a question of CO2 emissions, there's a question of transmitting epidemics, there's a question of plastics flowing into the ocean, there's a question of burning off landfills and putting black soot into the atmosphere. There's also a question of putting dioxins into the atmosphere, because when you burn waste, you produce dioxins if it's not controlled burning. So there's a whole series of things there, and we're losing so many opportunities. You know, if you landfill your waste, you're just throwing it away. But if you recover it, you're creating 10 times more jobs, you're putting resources and materials back into the economy, and you're saving all those greenhouse gases as well.
Which countries are leading and which ones are really falling behind in terms of
around the world there's
waste?
Japan and Korea, which are really doing a good job, and then there's about half a dozen countries in Europe which are really high quality: the Netherlands, Belgium, Sweden, Austria, then northern Italy, southern Britain. And you're British, so some parts of Britain are now at the highest standards, and then there's the rest of the world, and the rest of the world is roughly half the world's population doesn't even have a waste collection system. Okay, so, you know, waste is just finishing in the rivers, it's finishing burnt in the... I was in Indonesia, I was in Jakarta in June, I was shocked. There you are in a 5-star hotel and eating in a 6-star restaurant, and you got waste burning all around you. Quite incredible.
How can we address this issue? How can especially developing countries start recycling systems? I mean, a lot of the time it can't be their priority, yet I expect they could be saving quite a lot of money.
Yeah, well, there are some recycling systems going on in developing countries where the informal sector has intervened, and for example in Brazil 99% of all aluminium cans are collected, but they're collected by street pickers. In Argentina the paper and the cartons are collected by street pickers. So there's a lot of informal recycling going on, but it's not systematic, it's not institutionalized. These people are working in very poor conditions. How can we jumpstart businesses, and how can we make sure that waste is treated properly? Well, I mean, it really is a question of money. And it really is a question of there being a political will and focusing investments upon those industries in these nations. And so far that has been lacking, totally.
Is it something that you think could get into these talks at COP19, the urgency to cut emissions from waste?
Well, we've pointed out, as the European Commission has done, that of all the European emission cuts that there will be by 2020, 18% of those come from the waste sector. That's as much as comes from the energy sector. Okay, so I'm really sort of fed up here, because it's the big conversations about energy, renewables, etc. There's no conversation about materials and how you save energy by not reproducing them, not digging them out the ground again, by recycling them and such like. So that's the message we're getting across. And the country I come from, Italy, will save this year some 50 million tons of CO2 emissions simply through the composting of organic waste, one of the biggest composters of organic waste in the world. So there are lots of really, really good stories out there. How do we multiply them? How do we get them to developing countries? Well, the only way we can get them is to bring them the technologies, bring them the know-how, bring them the experiences, bring them the collection systems, but bring them also the finance to kickstart that. Now, we do think some of that can come through the Green Climate Fund, and we hope so. But we also think that a lot of it's got to come really through donor money that's really got to be given as if it would be given to water systems or to health systems. Waste collection is really a question of health, and it should the attention should be focused on that.